Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jeff Josephson from leadgen.com, and today we're going to talk about a problem that many organizations experience, but that very few organizations diagnose properly. And this is a particularly important issue because unfortunately, it turns out that the problem we're going to talk about is the leading cause of business failure today, by far. So let's get into it. As you know, businesses spend an enormous amounts of time, effort, and money trying to grow their sales, launching new products, investing in marketing, expanding sales teams, exploring innovation initiatives, and of course, serving their customers. But despite all that effort, commercial outcomes are surprisingly poor. Products fail all the time. Marketing programs underperform all the time. Sales teams miss their quotas to the point where many companies don't even bother setting them anymore. And while strategic initiatives might get a little traction, they stall out with an astounding frequency. As a result, jobs are lost, investments are wasted, and what look like great opportunities simply die on the vine. So, what I want to do today is explore why this happens, why business initiatives fail, and introduce a framework that can help you understand the problem, help you prevent it at your company, and help you fix it if it starts happening in your business. So here's what we're going to cover in today's session. By the way, if you want to jump in on the conversation, if you have any questions or if you want us to debug your situation at the end of the workshop, just go to the link you see here at the bottom, leadgen.com live, and we can bring you up on stage and answer questions for you. Anyway, first we want to look at the scale of this business failure problem because as you'll see, it's enormous. Second, we'll talk about the explanations that organizations usually give when things don't work out, things like blaming competition, an inability to generate leads, not enough funding, and so on. Then we'll talk about some of the things that businesses normally do to address the symptoms, but that generally fail to turn things around because they don't actually get at the underlying problem. Then I'll introduce the conclusion that we've come to after working with thousands of businesses over the last 40 years. Specifically, that most business failures are due not to external factors like competition and not due to incompetence or a lack of funding, but due to a flawed understanding of their own market opportunity and something we call commercialization drift. To be clear, this is a huge issue because no approach that we're aware of today addresses this failure rate problem systematically for the general business case. Most approaches maybe address some symptoms, something to help your sales function, something to help your marketing function, something to help you manage your books better, or find better employees, or maybe develop products faster, or to optimize your click funnels or whatever. But what we've found is that when a business initiative isn't working, when it's not being successful, the reason is rarely just a problem within some function like marketing or sales that's part of the business, or even with operations or competition or money. It's almost always due to a flawed understanding of the market opportunity and how the business is set up to address it. Now, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone out there, because if you think about it, how often when an initiative fails do people say about it that they missed the market? It's like, in retrospect, oh yeah, they missed the market. Well, great Monday morning quarterbacking, where were you when we were putting this whole thing together? Anyway, recriminations aside, it turns out that statement has a lot of truth to it. Of course, it's easy to point that out, that they missed the market in retrospect. The important question is, what does that really mean? How do you solve the problem? And even better, how do you prevent it from happening in the first place? Again, in our experience, failure is rarely a problem just with sales or marketing or operations or money or the product. The cause, not the proximal cause, but the underlying cause, is actually architectural. We'll talk about that. So today, first, we're going to talk about the evidence that there's a problem, the symptoms, and the consequences. We'll then describe a way to look at your market opportunity that consistently leads to commercial success, or if you're already in trouble, it gives you a way to turn things around. Then, if we have time, we'll give you a short diagnostic tool so you can figure out whether the underlying cause what we refer to as commercialization drift, which is a symptom of having a flawed market opportunity architecture, whether that might be affecting your initiative. And finally, we'll open the discussion to some one-on-one analysis if anyone has hung around that long. So let's keep going. There's no question that organizations are very good at generating activity. Product teams build features, marketing programs generate engagement, sales teams pursue opportunities, but the economic outcomes often fall far short of expectations. New products miss their revenue projections, marketing produces activity, but not predictable revenue, sales teams pursue opportunities that never seem to close, products sit unsold, and strategic initiatives absorb resources and then quietly fade away. This pattern is so common that many organizations simply accept it as normal. They might refer to it as natural selection, creative destruction, portfolio math, or, if you'll pardon my French, stuff happens. But that raises an important question. Is the level of failure just the natural cost of doing business, or is something deeper happening? Before we try to figure that out, let's look at the data and see if the depth and scale of failure makes sense. Because on an anecdotal basis, sure, it's easy to chalk a case up to say bad luck. But if it's happening a lot, and I'm not going to say what that number, the number of cases has to be for this to be a systemic problem, but if it happens a lot, maybe, just maybe, there's something else going on besides portfolio math. So let's look at failure from inside the business. And again, if you want to come on and get some coaching and diagnose your own situation, just come into leadgen.com/live. Okay. When you're in the game, the subjective signals tend to be pretty murky, and that something's wrong. And that's a part of the problem, at least from a functional perspective. That is, let's say your revenue stalls while your marketing activity is increasing. You could say theoretically blame the effectiveness of your marketing program, so you try to fix your marketing program and move on. Or let's say marketing generates leads that sales can't convert, so you blame the lead scoring algorithm and you correct it and move on. Or your sales pipeline appears full, but your win rate declines. You could blame your sales team, so you get them some training and you move on. Or your sales cycle grows longer in spite of all the automation that you just purchased, so you tighten up your funnel management and you move on. Or your KPIs look great, but revenue growth stalls, so I don't know what you do then. You try something else. But this is playing whack-a-mole with the problem. If you're looking at these problems from a functional perspective, it's all kind of murky. Sorry, somebody called in. You can easily say to any one of them, just work harder, or let's buy another tool, or let's whack-a-mole this thing, and then move on. But the problem doesn't go away. In fact, it just gets worse. In many cases, you get forecast accuracy goes out the window, so you end up with a moving hockey stick for a forecast. You try discounting in order to drag things over the finish line, and you end up losing money on every sale. Or you beef up the product in order to appeal to more prospects, and you just end up competing on price against other vendors who got there first. Congratulations. Welcome to the death spiral. And of course, don't forget the finger pointing when things go south. Sales blames marketing, marketing blames sales, finance blames everyone, product development blames finance, and then the organization responds in the only way it knows how. It doubles down. It fires the lowest performers and uses the savings to try more stuff that's not going to work. But you can smell the blood. So let's look at the numbers, because if you're struggling, at least it might help to know that you're not alone. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, about 25% of all new businesses fail within their first year. Over 50% of all businesses fail within 5 years, and over 65% of businesses fail within 10 years. In other words, long-term survival is rare. Less than a third of the companies that are started make it past 10 years. Venture-backed startups show an even worse outcome. Roughly 80 to 90% of venture-backed companies ultimately fail, and they have some of the smartest people and more money than God, behind them. And even among the surviving firms, many struggle financially. Over 2/3 of businesses today report having major financial difficulties. And amazingly, market demand issues alone account for about 42% of business failures. So let me ask you, how does that make sense? Who would invest in a business that didn't have at least the market demand issue nailed down? That's nuts. But it's someone else's money, so whatever, right? No, it's not right. Anyway, as we're trying to figure out why so many business initiatives fail, why so many businesses struggle to succeed, let's take a peek under the hood. What's going on, for example, with their marketing programs? Well, according to a number of different studies that we've seen, and we look at all of them, only about 25% of marketing leads are qualified enough for sales engagement. That's not even to say that anything happens with them. It's just whether the salespeople think it's worth even talking to the lead. 79% of marketing leads never convert to sales due to poor qualification or targeting. 94% of all trade show leads are never followed up. I was at the auto show the other day. Thousands of people. I venture to say none of them are going to get followed up. Typical e-commerce conversion rates are under 2%, meaning more than 98% of visitors do not buy. Cold email campaigns produce response rates of only 1 to 3%, meaning roughly 97 to 99% failure rate. And even among cold open emails, only 3 to 5 conversions occur per 1,000 emails sent. That's not closed sales. That's just conversations and not necessarily productive ones. Well, it would seem like that would lead to a lot of failures. But wait, there's more. If you look at sales enablement, it's just as bad. Large number of CRM implementations fail to deliver any meaningful productivity gains, with sales leaders reporting an increase in lost opportunities due to system complexity, the exact opposite of what they brought the system on for. Marketing programs often show strong engagement metrics, but they consistently fail to translate into revenue growth. So what does engagement really mean? And digital campaigns generate traffic, but they deliver extremely low conversion rates relative to cost. And frankly, most digital campaigns don't even generate meaningful traffic. Across channels, digital, sales outreach, CRM, and lead generation, failure rates routinely exceed 90% of activity. I'm not going to go into well, I could. All right, we'll take a second. This is the tactical escalation trap, right? So let's look at how business leaders typically respond to this chaos. And that's where we find the tactical escalation trap. That is, when performance declines, organizations almost always reach for the same explanations. And each one sounds reasonable, each one leads to more activity, but most fail to fix the actual problem. And more important, none explains the systemic pattern of failure across industries, across businesses, size. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about an SMB or an initiative, a growth initiative in a Fortune 500 company. So what happens? On the left, you have an observation, and then on the right, you have a reaction. Sales says we need more leads, so marketing spend increases. Or sales says the leads aren't qualified, so targeting models and scoring systems are added. Or finance says sales execution needs more improvement because we're not making the margins, so sales training and new leadership are introduced. Or management says our messaging isn't clear, so they do a rebranding thing. Or sales says the product needs to be more competitive, so they add features and capabilities, making it more expensive. Or sales says we need better tools, so they bring in CRM, marketing automation, and analytics platforms that just create more busy work. Or sales says the pricing is the problem. Notice sales is usually like the gold, what is it? The bird in the gold mine. Yeah, can't remember. Pricing is the problem. So that sales says we're high price, so they discount, and then somebody concludes that the market is just difficult right now, and you get strategy resets and new initiatives. It's like being a hamster on a wheel. The problem is, right, if this were aviation, medicine, or engineering, no one would tolerate this level of failure. I mean, we're talking 80 to 90% or more of commercial initiatives failing. So who the heck is paying for all this? Well, Suppose you could argue it was good till the money ran out. But the fact is that this failure rate doesn't just impact the owners and investors, it affects the employees too. 35% annual sales rep turnover in the first year, jumping to 65% turnover rate for salespeople by the 2-year mark. 30% annual marketing leadership turnover. 60% of sales reps miss their quota. 50% of CMOs last less than 3 years, and 80% last less than 4. 80% of employees are bounced when startups fail, and 90% startup failure rate leads to huge job loss and turnover. In other words, this failure rate doesn't just kill companies, it destroys careers, it destroys hope, and it destroys families. When initiatives misfire, the consequences cascade through the workforce: missed quota, turnover, shortened tenure, and layoffs. So you could stick your head in the sand and say, this doesn't impact me, but it does. When you lose your job and you have to compete with 1,000 other people just to get an interview, that hurts. It depresses salaries, it kills the job market, and it makes it impossible for people to plan for their future, to buy a house, to pay off their student loans, to send their kids to college, or ever hope to retire. And when it's your money, it's even worse. So sure, hop right up on that merry-go-round and see how it goes. So let's look at explanations that fall short. So people tell themselves a lot of lies. The market became more competitive. The sales team wasn't strong enough. Marketing needed better targeting. We need more leads. But you know what? Competition exists in every market, but failure rates remain consistently high across industries. Sales teams are frequently replaced or retrained, but the performance volatility continues. I mean, you go on and on. Discounting can temporarily increase deal flow, but it typically compresses margin without solving the actual demand issue. Product expansions frequently increase complexity without improving adoption rates or sales velocity, and go on and on. Maybe these make sense in isolated cases, but can they all explain, if you add them all up, it's got to mean something. Do they really point to a pattern rather than just playing whack-a-mole? And that's the issue. So, well, you could always hire a consultant, right? Even companies that have access to fancy consultants fail, by the way, at virtually the same rate as anyone else. They just have deeper pockets to be able to afford it, because at some point they did have a success that they could use as their breadbasket. So why do they fail? They fail because they're trying to solve the wrong problem. So what are some of the things that people do when you bring in a consultant? You have lean product development, but faster iteration improves the product, but it doesn't ensure that the product is being built for a clearly defined need and segment. Or you could try move fast and scale quickly. Sure, speed assumes product market fit exists, but if it doesn't, scaling magnifies the error. Or you could try growth hacking and funnel optimization, and it may improve conversion efficiency, but it assumes that the right prospects are entering the funnel in the first place, and if they're not, you're just filling up your funnel and nothing's coming out the bottom. Lead scoring, or as we call it, putting lipstick on a pig, provides visibility into activity, but they don't validate whether the target market itself was coherent, whether those leads were actually good in the first place. Brand building and repositioning. Sure, it clarifies your messaging, but it can't compensate for a product that doesn't fit a defined need. And you can start to see where we're going with this. Sales enablement playbooks, artificial intelligence, right? It accelerates execution, but it doesn't determine whether the opportunity itself is structurally sound. And if you haven't encountered hallucinations in artificial intelligence, which we euphemistically refer to as autocomplete, glorified autocomplete, it's going to lead to more failure, faster failure, and more expensive failure. More campaigns, more activity, cost cutting can improve margins temporarily, but it doesn't restore direction. The problem is you're going after the wrong market and you're not fitting into the market that's there. Okay. If none of this stuff works, what do you do? So let's step back a little bit. Hopefully this will make sense. The question is, what are we really looking at? When marketing says we don't have enough leads, when sales says the leads are bad, when product says the messaging is wrong, when finance says customer acquisition costs are rising, When leadership says the market is difficult right now, and all the other symptoms and all the other problems I talked about, when everybody's talking around the issue, maybe they're all talking about different perspectives on the same underlying condition. And it's probably not execution. It's probably not within one or two functions. It's usually structure. So, what structure enables commercial success? What's the structure that's causing the problem? Now, or put another way, what's the elephant in the room? Well, in our experience, it comes down basically to the definition of a market opportunity. That is, it's not the go-to-market that's wrong. It's the who are we and why do we exist in the first place that are the real problem. Or put it another way, when you miss the market, it's usually because you took your eye off the ball. So we have to ask, what was the ball that you took your eye off of? And it's not closing sales, because we already talked about the fact that sometimes sales don't close, they drag on. And it's not just because you're not generating leads. Maybe you are, you're doing lots of activity, but they're not converting and they're not closing. So it has to be something bigger. It has to be something that's cross-functional. And that's the market opportunity itself. So let's take a look at the structure of a market opportunity. Now, before I get into it, I need to make something clear. We've been working this problem for more than 30 years, actually more like 40 years. As for me, I got my MBA in marketing and strategic planning at Rutgers University, and I got a graduate certificate in strategic planning at Wharton. And we, as LeadGen.com, my company, have worked with thousands of businesses over the years. And I can tell you one thing, other than on maybe day 2 of your intro to marketing course, they don't teach this in business school. And you cannot get a job in it when you come out of school because it doesn't fit the traditional functional models. But it is, in our opinion, the critical path item when it comes to being successful in the market. So let's look at it. Simply put, every business opportunity requires 3 things in order for it to pay off. It needs a product with features and prices, of course, a defined need whose economic consequences justify purchasing that product, and a population experiencing that need that you can access. Or paragraph form, a profitable market opportunity exists when a clearly defined need with a meaningful economic consequence is shared by an accessible and homogeneous population, and that need can be addressed by the product in a way that is perceived as superior to alternatives. Remove any one of these things and you've got nothing. No market, no opportunity. If you can't access your prospects, you're out of luck. If they don't have a need, you're out of luck. And if you can't satisfy that need in a way that's perceived to be superior to substitutes, you're out of luck. It's that simple, not rocket science. Well, actually, there is a lot of science behind this, the structure and how to solve the problem. But most organizations, even if they understand the concept, can't figure out how to solve the problem for themselves because of the way they're structured. It's amazing how many businesses fail because they don't even understand the basic architecture of a market opportunity. Sometimes they'll understand it when the product is first being developed, but as soon as it's released to marketing, to sales and operations and production and finance, all of a sudden, this relationship goes to pot. Different subject, different presentation. But they get caught up in functional implementations or ClickFunnels or ICPs or MQLs or some other nonsense that are completely disconnected from the opportunity they're trying to capitalize on. Or worse, they listen to people who make money selling solutions to not that problem. Sometimes it's due to siloing, sometimes it's because of perverse incentives, but ultimately it's because no one in the organization has responsibility for maintaining fidelity to this opportunity structure. We have a name for it. We call it commercialization drift, where basically the business takes their eye off the ball. And remember, that's why they fail. Before we can look at how it gets screwed up, let's take a look at some details so we're not deluding ourselves into thinking we're doing the right things when we're really not, which you can see on the next slide. To be clear, when we talk about needs, and this is really, if you take nothing away from the conversation today, focus on this. When we talk about needs, we're not talking about things like efficiency, cost savings, higher response rates, improved customer satisfaction, whatever it is. Those are goals, not needs. Needs talk about the underlying problem. That is, your product solves a problem. When we talk about needs, it's the pain, it's the problem, the unmet goal, the aspiration, the hope. It's the core that drives the demand, not the goal. Okay, so something's broken when you looking at a prospect, whether it's B2B or B2C, doesn't matter. I'm not hitting an objective. I have a flat tire. My e-commerce site doesn't work. Whatever it is, those are needs, right? It's like the old saying, if you haven't heard it, nobody needs a drill. They need a hole, or they need to hang a picture, or they have a toothache. That's another need that justifies buying a drill, or at least getting access to them. When you define needs, don't make inferences, and focus your business on satisfying those needs. Don't focus them on the goals. Focus your business on solving problems, satisfying the needs that your prospect has. When you move away from that, that starts the process of commercialization drift, and you will lose relevance, focus, and ultimately the market. Okay? Don't generalize. Likewise, when we talk about prospects, you want to characterize your population, but you don't want to create some ideal customer profile. That, just as an aside, ICP is a nonsense concept that was made up by the list vendors because demographics are the only variables they can offer. So that's what they give you. It has nothing to do with characterizing your market. Think about it this way. Not everyone, and frankly, usually not even a minority of suspects with a given job title, in a given zip code, in a given geography, will have the same needs. Making an inference that they do is a death wish. So if someone tells you that you need to define your ICP, run away. Same definitional problem applies to your product. You're not selling efficiency or improved performance or a higher customer satisfaction. You're selling, as one of our clients who sells pizza ovens puts it, you're selling a box that gets hot. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean that's how you're going to promote it, but you want to look for people who need a box that gets hot, that has a problem that will be solved by it. It has features, it has a price, it has maybe some support, color, whatever. That's what you're selling. And you're not selling solutions. That's another thing that people do. Anytime you're in the business of selling solutions, you might as well start floating your resume. You're not selling solutions. You're selling products or services. Okay. Oh, this is going to go too far. Okay. I'm not going to go into the details of how this comes together in a strategy today because it's getting late, other than to say that you have to do some analysis before you start setting your tactics. But the point is that this model, starting with what are the problems that you're trying to solve, and stay focused on them. Who are you trying to solve them for? Identify those people and stay focused on them. And what do you have to offer these prospects to solve that problem that's better than the alternative? It's basic as a rock fight. Not getting that right, and more importantly, not sticking to it, is the reason why 90% of business initiatives fail. So let's talk about about alignment and commercialization drift. So there's this thing we refer to as alignment, which basically says what we just talked about. A profitable market opportunity requires that a product or service be applied to a defined need that's experienced by a homogeneous segment of prospects that the organization can access and satisfy in a way that's perceived to be superior relative to substitutes. Here's what it looks like when it's working on the left side of the slide. With an aligned opportunity, the product addresses a defined need or problem. The problem is experienced by a homogeneous segment that you can access. That is, you have a channel of communications to reach them. If you can't, you're going to lose. With this structure, your messaging is clear because you can talk about the problem. Your sales conversations are consistent because, again, you're talking about the same needs. And your growth is predictable because you understand who in your market has that need and how to reach them. And then there's drift, which you can see on the right side of this slide. This is where...
Incoming chat.
Oh, goodness. Sorry, can't talk. In commercialization drift, Your product expands into multiple applications. You start pitching the product for applications that don't quite fit. The needs you address become abstract. You start using terms like we sell efficiency and we sell growth. That's nonsense. You don't sell that, right? Instead of talking about the problem, you generalize about the benefits. Or your target audience broadens. Instead of targeting the people who have the problem, you target some ICP or some demographic. As a result, though, your messaging becomes generalized, your sales cycle lengthens, your win rates decline, and the failure is as predictable as sunrise when you use this model, or more accurately, when you don't use it. Here's some more drift symptoms. Sorry, people trying to come in. That's the hard part about this, right? Good timing. Here's some other symptoms of commercialization drift that you can use when you look internally at your own situation to figure out whether you're going to miss the market. Within your market, if your target market keeps expanding, you ask questions like, we could sell this to almost anyone, or you just try to figure out who else can we sell to? Of course, we're not selling to the people we thought we were going to sell to. Or you define multiple use cases and that you're promoting simultaneously, or different departments describe the customer differently, or sales success, this is a really bad one, depends heavily on individual reps rather than a repeatable pattern. With your messaging and positioning, if your value proposition keeps changing, if your messaging focuses on capabilities rather than outcomes, if different marketing materials emphasize different problems, you're getting off path. You're going to fail. Okay? With your product, if product features accumulate without clear application logic, we're not going to get into applications today, we'll do that in another session. But if your product roadmap is driven by large customers because you want to be opportunistic rather than segment logic, you're going to fail. If your product demos vary widely depending on who's presenting, that's a big symptom. With your sales process, if sales cycles become unpredictable, protracted, if win rates vary dramatically across what otherwise would be very similar accounts, you're stepping in it. If prospects require extensive education before they recognize the need, this one is a crazy one. If you have to educate the market, you're going to fail. Not that you shouldn't educate the market, but if you have to, you're going to fail. Prospects should know what their needs are, even if they're latent, even if they're hidden. If you have the right messaging out there, your messaging will connect with the latent need or hidden need. They will recognize it, and you don't have to educate anybody about anything. With your marketing, if you have campaign performance that varies widely across channels, that's a symptom of a problem. If your lead generation produces lots of volume but very little revenue impact, that's another problem. Okay. Oh, we have some bonus symptoms. Let's see what we got. CAC rises across multiple channels. Forecast accuracy declines despite better data systems. Discount increases even when demand appears strong. That's a big one, right? Sales and marketing start pointing fingers and blaming each other. That's how you know you're getting off track. That is, when a single symptom appears, the cause might be tactical or functional. What I'm trying to explain to you, and hopefully you're seeing that, is when you have multiple symptoms appearing simultaneously, the problem isn't functional. The problem is structural. And therefore, you have to solve it with a stepping back and starting over, looking at your market opportunity and how it's really defined between the prospects, the needs, and the products, and build out from there so that your targeting is more accurate, your segmentation is more accurate, your media plans are more accurate, more appropriate, and more efficient. Okay. Okay, we can do the diagnostic. We're running a little ahead. Here's a diagnostic. You can use a little bit. I'm repeating myself a little bit, but commercialization drift, it usually starts slowly and emerges through subtle signals. So here's what you can look at. In product signals, you're adding features in response to competitors rather than defined need. Product capabilities are described more clearly than their actual applications. Roadmaps are driven by the loudest customer or prospect, that's even worse, rather than segment logic. When it comes to needs, Needs are described by abstractions like efficiency, visibility, and growth rather than actual problems, pain points, and issues. The economic magnitude of the problem is unclear or it's just assumed. It should never be assumed because your willingness to pay comes from the economic magnitude of the problem. If you have multiple problems grouped into one narrative, that's a problem. If your target markets are defined by demographics rather than shared needs, this is the ICP problem. Again, there is no such thing as an ideal customer profile. That is a nonsense concept. What there is and has been for decades is the concept of a market segment. That is a homogeneous group of prospects, a group of prospects who are homogeneous with respect to their needs that you can access. Okay? An ICP is simply a convenience for someone who's doing a data dive to try to find records that you can call, email, or market to that has nothing to do with their needs. I'm dribbling on. Okay. Marketing and sales signals, more diagnostic. If your lead volume is prioritized over structural fit, if sales complaints about lead quality, if CRMs track activity but not defined need conditions, financial is always a good place to look for symptoms. Discounting increases to close deals, customer acquisition costs rise across channels, forecast accuracy declines. If one or two of these signals appear, maybe the problem is just likely with execution or it's tactical. But if several of these signals appear, pardon me, the issue is unlikely to be tactical, it's likely to be structural, and you're approaching the market entirely wrong. And by the way, if 4 or more of these signals are happening in your company, drift is already underway and you're in trouble. You need help. Okay. Closing thought. All right. Most organizations try to fix commercialization problems with better execution, better marketing, better sales tools, more features, discounting. But if what we've talked about is happening in your business, multiple problems, it's probably not an execution problem. It's probably not within one function. It's a structural problem, and structural problems don't respond to tactical fixes. There is no Band-Aid that you can put on on your company's failing if you have a structural problem, if you're suffering from commercialization drift. It is not a Band-Aid solution. You need to get back to some basic positioning, targeting, and strategy development so that you can approach the market in a rational way that is likely to result in profitable revenue growth. Okay. Now, some of you will recognize parts of this. You'll see symptoms and think, yeah, we've dealt with that. But if you're seeing multiple symptoms at the same time, inconsistent win rates, rising acquisition costs, longer sales cycle, marketing activity that isn't returning revenue, high probability that commercialization drift is already underway. At that point, the question is, what campaign should we run? Are we actually aligned with the real market opportunity? It's not something most organizations can answer internally, at least not objectively. So here's what I'd suggest. And this isn't meant to be a commercial. You can figure this out on your own. Everything you need to know is on that slide right there. But if this resonates, if you're seeing these patterns in your business, we put together a working session where we can work through your situation, or if you want to jump in today, we can do it now and help you determine whether or not you have a structural issue. No pitch, no commitment, just answers to tell you whether you're dealing with drift or something else. So if you want to jump in here on the live, go to leadgen.com/live, or reach out to me directly on LinkedIn or on leadgen.com. Mention the workshop. Worst case, you walk away knowing this isn't your problem. Best case is you'll fix something that has been quietly undermining your business before it gets worse, before it's fatal. So if anybody's out there, have any questions, want to debug your own problem, just go to leadgen.com live. And I'll hang around for about 5-10 minutes, if that. And if anybody jumps in and wants to talk about why their business is in the tank, there may be an easy answer. Okay, it's a quiet day. I guess everybody's home doing their taxes. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, we'll see you next week.